as above, so within, as within, so without. And so that this experience, this expression, this aspect, this conversation, I am as God created me. In the love, in the light, in the glory, I am light. I'm not my past. I'm not what people have said. I'm not what may have happened or what I think might happen in this holy now instant. The only instant that there is, the only reality that there is, the truth of our being, the truth of this expression, of this experience is that we are absolutely as God created. And the title of this conversation is Deliberate Creation. And so I ask the question, how do you think God creates? How do you think the all that is creates? How do you think that the infinite creates? It creates in doubt, in uncertainty? I don't think so. I don't think so. It creates from a certainty and an assuredness of itself, of its power, of its love, light, energy. Some talk about creation of this form that we call the universe and the cosmos as having occurred with a big bang that's definite, that is certain, and that went out into all of creation and is still extending, is still expanding, has not ceased to continue its expression and its extension, and so too with each of us. It is said that God created. God ever only created one thing, one creation, and that it is said that it is the Christ. It is said that it is the mind of Christ, and that everything else that was created from that. That everything else that was created. And so in Christian scriptures, it starts with John 1-4, and it talks about, it says, in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in that beginning of the Word, how I define the Word is the extension and the expression of that I am. Is the extension and the expression of the Christ that is each of us. And that if God only ever created one thing, and as Meister Eckhart would say, God is forever begetting the only begotten. So it is always coming from source, the only begotten, which is that Christ of our being, which is that spark of the light. And so the invitation, many of us have been following along a conversation over several weeks that began with an invitation, and the invitation is that you're called. The invitation is that each of us have received an invitation, and that invitation is requesting your presence, is requesting your participation, is requesting your acceptance. And you can accept it at any time that you wish. You get to choose. But when you say yes to the invitation, and the invitation is to the party, is to the experience of waking up, remembering who we are as spirit, what we are as the Christ, and how we serve by extending from there. That's what the invitation is. And when you're ready to play in that way, you simply say yes. And then we talked about the promise. And the promise is this. The promise is that it is absolutely assured that at some point you're going to say yes. It's absolutely assured and already a done deal that we will awaken to who we are. It's assured. It's already done. Actually, that is the meaning of quote unquote salvation. The meaning of it is that it is complete. It is done. And if we are each a thought in the mind of God, we never leave that source. We are always in that. Now, we can fall asleep and pretend that something else is going on, but it doesn't make it real, and it doesn't make it lasting. And so the invitation is to wake up from the dream of having fallen asleep and believing that we are separate from Creator. And when we say, yes, I desire nothing more than to awaken and to understand and know and live from that I am as God created me. That becomes the desire of my heart that I'm wholly committed to. And when you marry that desire with this wholehearted commitment, man, look out. Look out. It is done. It is complete. And so the next thing that we talked about was the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle, the camel having to squeeze through this very small space, which is called the eye of the needle, the gate into Jerusalem, the gate into peace, the gate into the habitation of heaven, the realm of ever-expanding good. And what it has to do is unload, let go. And we talked about 100%. Spiritual growth, development, and unfoldment is about letting go. We're letting go of our ideas. We're letting go of what we've been thinking in the separate experience of the dream. We're beginning to let those things go, to place them upon the altar of the heart. And truly what we're doing there is we're humbling ourselves. We're humbling the ego aspect of self that thinks it knows how to do this. And what we further talked about from this experience is that, well, even if you unload all that, still having an egoic aspect, it still requires help from a different purview. And that through God, with God consciousness, all things are possible. And yes, I can squeeze through what seems to be impossible into the limitless. And so that's really what our conversation is. And so this deliberate creation, how we are here to deliberately create our experiences, to create as God created, with that certainty and from the only thing that we can create from, which is love. And so that's what the conversation is about. And what I want to share with you, and what I wrote in my little description of this, is we're always creating or making something, are we not? We believe we're making a life, making a living, baking a cake, creating a ministry, cultivating a marriage or a partnership. We're always in the activity of creation. And you see, our choice here is that we can either do it consciously or unconsciously. And I would say we've been doing it unconsciously, or I know I have, at least for a good portion of my life. There's a poem that I just love, and it's actually entitled The Calling. And it's from Oriah Mountain Dreamer. And the very first line talks about, wake up, you're walking asleep. There's no safety in that. And we think that there is safety in the way that we have been conditioned to do things, the way we believe that the conditioning of our upbringing and the domestication of humans, if you will, the way that we are taught by well-intended people is to keep ourselves safe. But we think it's contingent upon the world. You see, we have the power right now to take 100% responsibility for what we are experiencing right now. Wow, the moment I did that, the sawing stopped. I kept being pulled in that direction, and I thought, but you know what? I have 100%. I can be 100% responsible for my experience, right? And so walking asleep, there's no safety in that. but we're still making. Hello, look at the world. If you think that there are like no idle thoughts, take a look around of the experiences that have been made and created. And you can easily see what has its genesis in love and what has its genesis from fear. We can easily see that. More importantly, we can feel it. Can't you feel when something is coming from love versus when something is coming from fear? The feeling tone, the vibration that we have is so very important. And one of the biggest distinctions in this idea of deliberate creation that I like is that in A Course in Miracles, it makes the distinction between making and creating. And the distinction is based upon where your consciousness is, where your thoughts are, where your attention is. And when your thoughts and attention are on surviving in a world and walking asleep based in the conditioned ideas of the world, which has its genesis in separation and therefore fear, we're making. It's a making of something, of a dream, of illusions that feel real when you're in it. That feel real when you're in it. But when you begin to shift and to pause and to take a breath and go, no, I'm the creator of my experience, not what has been, but in this now holy instant, that I can shift my consciousness and therefore my vibration to a different level. And when I align with this mind, with this vertical consciousness that God and I are one, I am as God created me, it shifts me into love, and then I extend love. And what extends from love is eternal. It never shifts. It's always love. And so deliberate creation requires our attention and our awareness and our choosing. You can also speak the word a little bit differently. Yes, it's deliberate. I've been saying deliberate, but we can also say deliberate. Deliberate. It means I'm going to deliberate. I'm going to pause and connect and have a consult with the spirit of my being and create from there. So during about the first half of my life, I was more along the lines of making. I was a good girl. I loved my parents. I trusted them. They guided me in ways that they believed would keep me safe. And I remember when I was approaching college years, and I remember I wanted to take all the liberal arts courses and all the religious courses and all of those arts and things like that. And I did that for a while. And I remember having a conversation with my dad. And he really thought I should go to business school. He really believed that that's what would keep me safe in the world. And that's what kept him safe. It afforded him a living to raise his family. It was, he may have had other dreams, but he followed a certain pathway that seemed to be the right and righteous pathway in this world. And he wanted me to go into business school. And, well, since he was footing the bill, I started taking business courses, and I eventually graduated with a degree in business. And I went out into the world, and I could make a living, and I could support myself, but it always felt like something was missing. It always felt like something wasn't quite right, like I wasn't in the right place in this world. And so I remember I would be on sales calls. I was a salesperson. I would go on these sales calls, And I wasn't really always that interested in what I was selling because I'm not a real detail-oriented person, and it was medical equipment and supplies and pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. But I would go in with a notepad and I would just take notes from my customer. And I would develop relationships. And soon it seemed like they were telling me things that they shouldn't be telling me, that had nothing to do with anything I was selling. And I thought, wow, you know, part of me was a little uncomfortable with it, but most of me felt really honored. And I felt like, wow, I have a listening that people seem to be attracted to, a presence. I wasn't really saying a whole lot. I was a presence. And I ended up being like the #1 salesperson. And I still couldn't really tell you a whole lot about what I was selling, right? But I was relating. And so this led me to think, well, maybe I should be a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a sociologist. But meanwhile, I was going to a Unity church at the time, and I started learning about these principles of thought and mind and how we create our lives. And that as I worked with those principles, like thoughts are things, well, let me think about that. And how I could focus on something, and then it would end up being attracted to me. And these laws of manifestation. And I'm like, I like this. And so I went through this period of time where I would weigh, do I want to be a spiritual counselor, or do I want to be a psychiatrist or psychologist? And I went back and forth because I still had a conditioned mind that thought it was more important to have certain acronyms behind my name in order to be taken seriously in the world. And eventually what I ended up doing, obviously, you guys know, I followed a road less traveled in my perspective at the time. Now, I remember at the juncture when I wanted to go to ministerial school, and I was consulting with my dad at the time. And he kept saying, well, that's really nice. That sounds like really fun and good. And, you know, I know you have an interest in that, but can you make a living doing that? And he kept like going back to that. And what I realized is he was really only just reflecting back to me, my own concern, right? Because I wasn't creating with that certainty and that deliberateness. I wasn't quite cooked yet. I wasn't quite there yet. And so, anyway, I become a spiritual counselor, and I go through schooling, and I qualify myself to do that. And I get to this point where I realize I'm still really creating from a conditioned mind. Because Claudia's still picking what I'm focused on and the thoughts that I'm thinking. And as wonderful as she is, and as magnificent and well-studied as she is, there's still a limitation there. There's still a block to the expansiveness of the infinite, of the universe and the all that is. She still carried with her her little fears and her little hang-ups. The first time I walked into a spiritual community outside of Toledo, Ohio, after I had moved there, nobody knew who I was. But they came up to me and they said, "Do you speak?" And I thought, well, of course I speak. I thought it was a trick question. And so when I said, yes, I speak, they put me on the calendar to give a talk. And I'm like, they tricked me. They tricked me into doing this. The first talk I ever gave was right around 2006 or 7. And it was right after, well, it might not have been right after, but it was in the vibration post The Secret. Anybody watch The Secret? And okay, so And I remember, I mean, my mentor was in that movie, Michael Beckwith, and all these people who I admired and I respected. And I remember listening to them and learning from them. And then I'd watch the movie and I'd be like, but there's something missing. And so my very first talk I ever gave was The Secret Part 2. And The Secret Part 2 was the connection with the divine, was shifting from the manifestor level consciousness where the conditioned mind is still picking what it wants. And those laws of manifestation will work there, but you will get what you're asking for. And if what you're asking for is limited, there's still something missing. The old metaphysical joke, which some of you might have heard, that illustrates this is, so I've just become the spiritual counselor and somebody walks into my office and they lay a wad of cash on the table and they say, pray me a husband, a wife, a spouse. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in business here. And so I'm going to get to praying for them what they've asked for. And I never see them for quite a while. Maybe a year or so later, they come back in and they put 2 wads of cash on the table and they say, make them go away. And I'm like, and that's really what illustrates. We can make from the conditioned mind, or we can create from the Christ mind. And the Christ mind for me is when we take that breath, which is what we did all morning. We connected in gratitude. We connected in realizing that we are light and that we are as God created us. And we began to create this experience from that consciousness, from that vibration, from love. Now you might say, well, this is going to end, but not really. You're going to walk out the door here today and you're going to carry something with you. And it's going to have something to do with love. It's going to have something to do with recognizing yourself in a different way. It's going to have something to do with possibility. And no one can take that away from you. Once a seed like this is planted, it is there always. You might choose to water it today and give it your attention and your focus today or tomorrow or next year or another lifetime, right? But at some point, there will be something of the eternal and the infinite that comes forth from this moment right now because of how we came together. Now you might say, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to raise my vibration from focusing on my conditioned ideas to shifting to the mind of God, to the mind of love, which isn't separate from you. You are the Word, and you are with God. And drum roll, you are God. You do not separate from that. We do not really. We might fall asleep and think we do. But this is with us for always. And so how we rise in this love, consciousness, and as maybe your eyes are closed right now, and you might breathe in and breathe out. For me, when I'm having a hard time feeling that love, I might bring my attention and awareness to this beautiful being named Forenza, who was the first person who I sat in her presence and felt absolutely loved. Do you have somebody like that in your life? I remember sitting at her feet, crying, gnashing my teeth at the woes of my life and the world. And she would just call me beloved. And she'd listen and she'd behold me. Or a time when I climbed and summited a mountain in the summertime in Colorado. And I looked out on creation and I felt a closeness with the all that is. Or more recently, about a year ago, at my ordination, my second ordination at Unity, somebody sends me a picture and I'm on a stage being honored during the ordination, but there's a picture of my husband kneeling in the aisle taking a picture of me. And I knew I was loved and supported. There's also a memory when I was younger where I'm laying in a field of tall grasses, looking up at the vast blue sky, and I felt the presence. I invite you in this holy instant, if it hasn't already happened, when have I felt loved? Absolutely. And so certain that I was created in love. Can you see it? Can you feel it? Can you imagine it? This is where we go often, daily, moment by moment, every hour. Begin to focus here. Begin to focus here. And when you do, access that point where you know and feel and sense this vibration of love. Remind yourself, I am as God created me. I am the deliberate creator of my experience. I choose to create from love. I choose to align with the mind of God. I place upon the altar all of my ideas, everything I think. And I allow love to catapult it into and rise in consciousness, that I may know and see that that which creates from me is light, is love, is eternal, is changeless. Form might change, but the seed idea of love is changeless. The mechanics of manifestation are the same. We focus here. As we focus, it expands and extends. But it expands and it extends from a place of certainty, deliberateness, assuredness. And so we just take a breath here. I say, thank you, Mother, Father, God, Infinite Spirit, that the Christ has walked into this room and that it is each of us. Each of us is alive, awake, and aware in the mind of God. And something wonderful and magnificent is seeking to express through us, uniquely, divinely, just for us to extend, for the pure joy of creating, Oh, goody, goody. Yay, finally. I am free, beyond condition, beyond limit, beyond limitation. I am free. I am unlimited. I am fearless. Because love and the all that is propels my creations as word, with God, as God, in, through, and as me. And so it is, and so we are. Amen.